What is it that I can offer as a vendor that no, they can't get anywhere else? Or they can somehow get better than they can get anywhere else? And that's a very important question to answer. And I think for people to think through as the amount of communities and programs and whatnot just continues to expand, there are so many options. So, what is your key value proposition that is unique to just you?
Alrighty, folks, welcome to another great episode today of The State of Customer Storytelling. My guests today are Liz Richardson and Dina Zenick, the co-founders and managing partners at Captivate Collective. Liz is an award-winning customer marketer and advocacy executive known for her work in customer engagement methodology. Most recently, she was also VP of customer advocacy at Influitive. And Dina is a pioneer in her field with over 15 years of hands-on experience in advocate marketing and customer engagement. She also co-authored a fantastic book, which I highly recommend, The Messenger is the Message, with Influitive and Eloqua founder Mark Organ. Liz and Dina, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks for having us, Sam. It's always lovely to get to collaborate with you. We're so glad we found you through this customer marketing network that we're proud to be a part of.
Likewise, and I always look forward to our conversations, and I always, evolve my thinking and learn a lot in all of them. And just to kick things off, I guess for context, I was thinking about trying to explain to people what Captivate Collective was in the intro, but it almost, in many respects, I think defies like a neat categorization because what you both do is so unique and powerful. So maybe just in your own words, what is Captivate Collective, and what do you do? Who do you help and such?
I guess I'll take this one. So Captivate Collective, we are an agency laser focused on customer advocacy and working with companies who are embarking on their customer advocacy journey or who are mid-flight and looking to expand the impact of what they're doing with their customers. So we typically sit on the strategy side with our clients, and we do so because we are always looking to what is the next best practice. How can we help our clients get ahead of the curve with customer engagement?
I love that, and I know on the website, right up front, you make a really interesting point, which is that customer advocacy is a practice, not a platform. Tell us more. Like, what do you sort of mean by that?
Well, it's a strong statement, both of us coming from an advocacy platform provider. But Liz and I were the first two folks on the services team at that provider. And what we saw happen over and over again were clients who had made a purchase decision about a product before they actually had an advocacy strategy in place. And that strategy is driven by what's most important to the business and executed through best practices that are common across platforms. We believe that the practice of customer advocacy is different to the platform. The platform is the channel through which you're executing your strategy, but the practice and the best practices sit outside of the platform and inform how you execute on your plan.
I like that. The phrase too, it's great that it caught your eye, Sam. We find that it's catching a lot of people's eyes. Even practitioners who've been in this space for a long time will read that for the first time and kind of have an aha moment of, oh yeah, like there is advocacy is not limited to any one tool or channel or anything of the kind. Advocacy is a practice and one that we're very passionate about. And the tools and the channels and the growing ecosystem around the customer marketing and advocacy space is there to support that strategy. You can choose tools based on, oh, that's a really cool tool. I love how it engages customers, or it does this or does that. However, if you don't have the strategy first, you are in danger of trying to create a strategy based on the platform rather than the needs of your organization or the desires and engagement style of the audience that you're actually trying to build relationship with. So it's customer needs first, business needs first, combine that for a strategy, then choose the tools that will support that strategy, and not the other way around.
Now, I would add to that as well, for how do we hold up that statement. When we think about customer advocacy inside the organization as a program or vis-a-vis a platform, that's one lens, that's one way of thinking about advocacy, and that's one way for your colleagues and your executives to think about advocacy. When you think about advocacy as a practice and you position advocacy as a practice, a discipline, that is guided by best practice, I think that you are opening up your scope and potential inside your business to be a real player, to be a real strategic player. Not that there's anything wrong with being a program manager. Programs and platforms have a place in the realm of customer advocacy, but framing this as a legitimate business practice, not a tool.
That's a great point, Dina, because if you think about other practices in the organization, they are not associated with a single tool. My role as a customer marketer is not my HubSpot instance. My role as a sales rep is not my Salesforce instance. There is a practice, and as customer marketing and advocacy professionals grow in their prominence in the organization, it is important that people start to see them as the practice and not a specific program or tool.
Such a good point. And it's like, it reminds me of this quote. I'm not sure who said it, but it was like, of methods, there are many, of principles, there are few, right? It's like there's kind of foundational best practices that can be applied in, myriad different ways, but it are almost like, if you don't get the foundational principles right, almost none of the tactical stuff matters. So it's such a key point. I love that. One of the other things that I really, that we were talking about it, and right before this is like, customer, how customer advocacy is evolving, right? Because like I think in some ways we're like very much in the early days of customer advocacy, but also it's because it's changing so fast, and it almost feels like we're in like a customer advocacy renaissance right now, and maybe customer advocacy 2.0. I'd be curious, like given both of your backgrounds in this space, how have you seen that evolution from your perspective, and what have been some of the hallmarks of that shift from like customer advocacy 1.0 to now what we're seeing customer advocacy 2.0?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because you're right, Sam. It's like it's a old and new practice at the same time. In terms of the other practices in the organization, it's a very young player. And it's still evolving. But in terms of, hey, now this practice has been around 10, 15, 20 years, depending on how far back you want to look at what it is today. That's enough time for the ecosystem to have changed quite a bit. And that's enough time where your business, the business layout in general, has changed enough that we are seeing the needs of the organizations changed. A great example, is even with the pandemic and what happened over the last year and a half, that has shifted business objectives and engagement with customers quite drastically, and has led to some of the prominence or the focus on customer marketing and customer advocacy. So we have been forced to mature, to keep maturing and mature faster than maybe we would have. But yeah, so Dina and I's background as practitioners, we were some of the earliest probably in this space, Dina specifically, building programs before B2B customer advocacy programs were really a prominent thing. They were more experimental and they were unusual or unique. We are seeing them come to more prominence and more regularity inside of the B2B space. So if we go back to what we call Advocacy 1.0 and we juxtapose that with Advocacy 2.0, with Advocacy 1.0, there were some very specific things in place with the practice. So first of all, kind of a unanimous consensus that advocacy was focused pretty much 100% on happy customers, right? And it was finding your happy customers and utilizing them for advocacy outcomes. And those outcomes were pretty squarely fixated on marketing and sales. And the value proposition was this idea of organizations and the lack of trust with organizations in general. And how are we going to get people to listen to our message if there is an inherent lack of trust with organizations? Who will they listen to? And this shift in human society from trusting institutions to being peer-led because of the connectedness of the internet and social media and whatnot. And so, like Dina's book is called, The Messenger is the Message, the point of how do we get our message across, the people who tell that message being just as important as the message itself. So the outcomes of advocacy were really focused on marketing and sales to get that message, the message through to your prospects that you would not have the trust to give yourself. And then a couple other factors, the emphasis on one-to-one relationships. So they were typically small programs with a white glove type of engagement. And then also, they were single destination engagement programs. I mean, they were new. There weren't a lot of them. So a lot of these programs had a single destination, maybe for everybody. They were more general in approach, a one size fits all type of approach with Advocacy 1.0. Did I sum that up? Anything I'm missing, Dina, that you would add to Advocacy 1.0?
10 out of 10.
Oh, yes. Pass the test.
Pass the test.
So, do you want to add to that, Sam? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you mentioned the sort of, obviously we're post 2020 now and in a hybrid or, often purely remote environment. How do you think, what have you both seen in terms of how that's affecting, advocacy and, customer stories and all of that? I mean, is it as simple as, I know, maybe it's like, gift cards are not as valuable anymore because like people now actually really want like time. It's like time is more valuable than ever because there's always something to do when you're around your house. But yeah, with your kids, with your family, like, so like, I guess how is like the remote work kind of changing the advocacy space and the fact that not all of us, but many of us are, working remotely?
I think one factor, when COVID hit was companies all of a sudden, had this focus on their customers, right? And instead of looking for new customers, it was about how are we going to retain the customers that we have. So as the customer, people started to get really quite inundated with communications opportunities, all virtual, right? So the idea of sitting through another webinar, maybe not quite as exciting as it once was. We've all heard about the kind of wild and wacky world of virtual meetups where, you're learning how to make a cocktail or smelling cheese or, whatever it is, right? Lots of really interesting ideas out there. But coming through that now with people kind of firmly settled into their remote roles, what we've seen happen over the last year is a real uptick in just kind of sporadic point in time communities that aren't necessarily driven by a vendor. So there are a lot of really great Slack communities out there that we've seen pop up that are focused on a practice area, right? Which is what customer advocacy programs have done as well. So you are a marketing automation professional. I'm the vendor. Join my program. Learn how to become a really good marketing automation professional. That's one of the benefits. With these Slack communities, they're super diverse, right? Not vendor driven, but still driven by the practice. So folks are getting kind of what they need in some ways from those programs. And then there are vendor driven Slack communities as well, which are kind of filling that gap. So it's becoming, less gated. So as part of Advocacy 2.0, we really talk about ungated advocacy, where it's no longer necessarily about going to a destination and being a kind of a card carrying advocate. There are many different ways for customers to interact and participate inside your business, inside your program, inside a platform, outside of it, and outside of your business and in the practice community.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to your point, Sam, and to Dina's, this availability, I will call it, of us all to connect at any time, anywhere. I mean, if you even think back 5 years ago, the expectation wasn't that I would just be connecting with people all over the world all the time. The ease of connection is so great. And there's a lot of great things that come with that. There are a lot of challenges that come with that. So even when we felt like with social media, there was this new space and we were inundated with all this information, so too in vendor relationship, you have some of that same mimicking going on. You have a lot more programs available now because, like Dina said, people are buying into the value of customer relationships as being extremely important. And so everyone knows they need to engage their customers, and everyone is thinking about the best way to do that. And so now you, as a customer advocacy professional, need to understand, well, if I have the desire to connect with my customers, what kind of incentives am I going to put in front of them that will differentiate anything they can get from any other vendor who has a program where they're offering benefits of some kind? And when I say incentives, I know people automatically start thinking of prizes, rewards, and whatnot, but I mean, what's the value to me to being part of this? And so I think with Advocacy 2.0, what we talk about is this need for increased personalization, right? It's not good enough anymore to throw up an advocacy or a customer program and say like, hey, awesome customers, we've got a really cool program for you. You being you, generally you. We need now to be thinking more minutely about who these people are as individuals as well. And we need to be personalizing the value proposition of our programs based on more information, more exploration, more data, so that we can stand out and offer the most value possible so that our customers are excited about that collaboration, because it doesn't feel like we're asking them to do us favors. It feels like we're offering exactly what they want and need.
Such a good point. And kind of drilling down into like the customer storytelling subset of advocacy, I'd love to hear, because many times that is, I think people's first, foray into the advocacy umbrella is often driven by, customer stories and the need for those. I'm curious, how do both of you, think about customer storytelling and customer stories specifically as, a part of that overarching, maybe one pillar of the kind of overarching advocacy umbrella or a key part of it?
I do think it's a key part, because when I think of advocacy in like the peak of, hey, what does an ultimate advocate look like? And I will often define that as someone who has connected your brand to their personal brand. It is now part of their personal brand story. So when your company has been able to identify a need and insert themselves in the need of that individual, not just making that business look great, because at the end of the day, all businesses are made up of individuals and we all are trying to succeed at something. So if I come alongside as a vendor and I am able to fulfill some of the needs of you, Sam, as an individual, and to such an extent that that is now part of my personal brand story, it is very hard at that point for me to remove that story of your brand out of my personal brand. And now you have ultimate advocacy because our stories are connected. So the connection of stories is a very, very important aspect of advocacy, and honestly the height of where we want to get with advocacy.
And I'll add to that, there's a formal storytelling aspect. So nurturing customers, developing relationships with customers, so that essentially they'll go through the process with you to get approval for a public reference, public case study. So there's that aspect of advocacy and storytelling. But further to Liz's point, there's the storytelling that happens outside of your formal case study. And those are the impactful stories that happen at networking events, at industry events, when someone posts on LinkedIn that, they need, well, just stick with marketing automation, they need a marketing automation tool. That's where the external storytelling with advocacy comes into play. Hopefully you've had some sort of moment or engagement with your customer where they've attached their brand to yours, and they're going to retell that story, because in telling that story, they're not just sharing the good news about you're the vendor. They're also in that moment sharing the good news about themselves and the good news about their relationship with you.
That's so true. And it's almost, it's like, that's the holy grail, right? That, word of mouth, that word of mouth marketing, that, you can't track it. It's sort of like in the dark, but, it drives the biggest results.
It's funny that you said word of mouth marketing, Sam, because I was listening to Dina. I was like, well, good gracious, are we just back at word of mouth marketing, which is not a new concept. That's been around
It's
for
not a new concept, but I think in advocacy it's intentional.
Yes, and I think that's what it is. It's, you're not leaving to chance. Oh, well, I hope they just have such a great experience and that they want to then organically go share their story. Yes, we want them to organically go share their story, but we want to lead them to that point of execution, and we want to create the experiences intentionally that lead to that shared storytelling.
Absolutely. And so if I'm a marketer, a marketing leader, customer marketer who's listening to this, and I'm like, this is great, where do I start, right? Like, can you share a little bit, around, how do I get started? If I want to, maybe I feel like, my company, maybe I feel like we're a little behind, or just we need to like kickstart our, our customer stories, our overall advocacy program. How do you think about like getting started and setting a strategy? And does it change a little bit based on, of course, like the size of the company, of course, and the resources available? But either way, it's like, how do you think about like that, really kicking it off and setting that strategy?
It always starts with talking to the customer, always. No matter how much you think you know about your customer, what assumptions you have, what prior interactions you have with your customer, when you're starting to think about being intentional with an advocacy strategy or customer engagement strategy, you need to go out to your customers. And we recommend doing that at two levels. One being a broad survey, where you're not just asking, how likely are you to recommend us? You're really probing so that you can understand what would be the value that your customer would need to get from any sort of, advocacy related interaction with you. How into gamification are they? Does your audience, get turned on by rewards? So there's the broad survey, and then also just one-to-one. Find your friendly customers and ask for half an hour on their calendar and probe a bit. Really build out that picture of who your customers really are. So not just a persona on a piece of paper, but who your customers really are. What would they really see valuable from their interactions with you? Like we really advocate for moving away from really kind of stale, overused value propositions in advocacy, like network with your peers, share the good news about our brand, get prizes, right? Like, I mean, they're just used over and over and over again, but really it's superficial, right? Understand who your customers are, understand what the value really is, and then start to build out your strategy from a data informed perspective right from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, as we see that evolution of the practice and it becoming more prominent, like what Dina said, it's so important. How can you understand how to motivate your customers if you don't understand what they want? You don't understand what they need. Yeah, they want a great product. So, I mean, that's where you start. If you don't have a great product, it's going to be very hard to get anyone to advocate for you. But once you're past that, what is it beyond that that you as an organization can help that person? And what can you do to bring them value as a vendor? You are just a vendor. You are a vendor. So what is the gap that you can possibly bring? I always like to call this, what's your no excuse reason that someone would want to join a program with you? What is that? If you're not sure what's that no brainer reason, then you may need to go back to the drawing board to understand, what is it that I can offer as a vendor that they can't get anywhere else, or they can somehow get better than they can get anywhere else. And that's a very important question to answer. And I think for people to think through as the amount of communities and programs and whatnot just continues to expand, there are so many options. So what is your key value proposition that is unique to just you?
Wow. Yeah. Ton of good stuff there. And that's making me reevaluate them thinking about our kind of customer advocacy, initiatives right now. And I say initiatives because even, with us, obviously we're a startup company and such. I feel like I would hesitate to call what we do a program because it's just not, that fleshed out. We're a startup, no single person is like in charge of that. But I'm curious, like, is that just, taking companies like us, for example, like, is that okay for a startup? Is it sort of like a progress, not perfection thing? And like, is it one of the things where it's like, you can do customer advocacy without an advocacy program, but, the goal is to get to a program, I guess. Yeah. How do you sort of think about that for, I guess, especially for smaller companies who like, I get it, I want to do it. I don't, the idea of a program is intimidating, maybe.
Absolutely. So a couple of thoughts on that one. First, we will always say that even before a program, there is a mindset, we call it the advocacy mindset. And so if the culture of your organization is set around seeing and looking for opportunities to play into the needs and desires of your customers, to create those relationships and to bring forth those stories, you can already do advocacy initiatives, right? So instilling that mindset and that culture in your organization is a key part of it. And that's something you can start today. But then secondly, can we get started if we don't have a major formal program? Yes, absolutely. And we also see that as a part of even thinking about Advocacy 2.0, beyond formal programs, what is there? Now that this area has expanded, this practice has expanded, what is there beyond just formal programs? What about all the people who aren't even ready to join a formal program? So whether it's just because you don't have it or because there's a whole bunch of customers who aren't interested in another login, another membership, how are you going to reach those prospective advocates who may not think of themselves even as advocates, but are still more than willing as enthusiastic friends of your organization, we call them friendlies, to go ahead and do something that they find valuable in that moment or worthwhile in that moment. So one of the things we like to help clients think through is, where along the customer journey, where can you align advocacy naturally along the customer journey? When is an appropriate time to ask for a review? Not just appropriate, but opportune. Like it makes sense in the customer's mind that they are being asked for a review at this time, or there is some sort of, give and take that makes sense in their mind. Oh, yes, I just got a lot of value, so it makes sense that I would want to give value back, because that's how we are wired as human beings. When we receive value, we feel the need to give value as well. So it is very so it's interesting, Sam, because your question might be like, oh, like what's for a less mature organization? What can I do? But what we see is a lot of the mature organizations have been focused on programs and less so on the alignment of advocacy to that customer journey. And we really advocate for thinking through that customer journey and building the advocacy journey in alignment with that. And so you can create a simple process around a milestone moment that will get you some of those early results, help you identify where some people are at in their advocacy journey with you, and allow you to start building some key places to either build that relationship or to cull some great outcomes that are valuable to both you and hopefully the customer as well. I'm sure Dina has more to add to that.
Well, I love that you started off there, Liz, with the advocacy mindset, because that really is something that anyone can do. It's just about getting people together and making sure that you're aligned on what your mission is and what your desired experience for your customers is, and how you all work together towards that. I mean, at just a very basic level, if people are tuned in, if you're all reading from the same page of the same book, why not just empower your CSMs? Give each of your CSMs a little slush fund for just surprise and delight at their discretion, right? Like, not a lot of barriers, not a lot of boundaries, but just starting to lay the foundation for a different level of customer engagement and experience. So you can start really small. Hey, I started with a spreadsheet. So you can you can start just with what you've got, and as Liz said, figure out who those customers are who might already be on that path with you, and then start to nurture them and go for the right ask at the right time.
I love that. And yeah, speaking of, starting with a spreadsheet, to the first point that we were talking about, it's like you said, it's about the principles, and the best practices, and the tools are sort of, it's like agnostic, right? As long as you have that in place. And obviously that's, what both of you help, your clients with. And I'd also I note, and speaking of like advocacy 1.0 versus 2.0, Liz, you mentioned sort of like the buyer journey. I would put forward, I'd posit that could be another, big hallmark between maybe advocacy 1.0 and 2.0 is more of like a full buyer journey approach to customer content creation and dissemination. Whereas, I feel like there used to be sort of like, at least for content, sharing, it was like, okay, like the buyer is like almost over the finish line. Let's hit them with the best like customer case studies and video testimonials at that point to push them over the line. Whereas what I'm seeing and is like now is that it's like buyers want to self-consume content from other customers throughout the entire buyer journey, and they want to kind of self-serve, and they want to consume different things based on their stage. It's not like the one size fits all kind of like monolithic kind of case study approach that maybe we used to see in 1.0, right?
Yeah, and I think there's also that pre-sale advocacy piece where any interaction that prospect is happening with your company, your content, your people, the person that you call up for that reference, as the deal is really getting close to the finish line. All of those interactions have the potential to build advocacy before that deal's even closed. In a way, when you're bringing in a reference to speak to that prospect close to the finish line, you're showing them what it's like to be an advocate for the company, because your reference is performing an active advocacy. When they're interacting with your salespeople, what does that feel like? What aspects of nurture are built into that experience with the salesperson? So yeah, we totally believe it all starts from those, early touch points with the business, and what we do with them is often overlooked. We don't really consider the full scope of the customer experience until they've signed on the dotted line.
But to your point, what I think you're saying, Sam, is, even like the type of content that's used in that buyer journey is likely shifting. The typical, 1, 2, 3, and they get to the very close line and they got to do a reference. They got to do a one-to-one reference call. Even some of that is changing, right? Because how we perceive authenticity and trustworthiness is changing. And so anything almost sometimes coming from a vendor, even a one-to-one reference, we're kind of skeptical, right? Because we're like, we know you picked that reference. So obviously they're not going to say something terrible about you. Even how we coach our references. This is a big debate in some places, right? Should we ask people for 5-star reviews? Should we ask sales references to, please share this, and this, and make sure that this comes out and whatnot? It is so tempting, but I do think we as buyers are becoming so savvy that we almost distrust now too much positive reaction. I am a weird person, I've noticed. Like, even when I'm going to go choose a book, I read through so many reviews. I am like very in tune with, what do other people feel about this? Was this worth their time? And if I just see a ton of like 5 stars after 5 stars, I'm a very skeptical mindset. My skeptical mindset says, I wonder if the author gave away like a ton of books in exchange for some reviews. Like, we really are trying to sniff out any scent of inauthenticity, and we want to make our own decisions, and we don't want to be manipulated into thinking this or that. So where the practice is going as far as storytelling, like how we get customers to tell our story, I think we're going to have to put some thought into that, right? Because it's not going to be enough just to get case studies or even reviews. As reviews are really hot right now, but man, I mean, there's a point in anything where they lose their power, right? When you have too much inundation of something, it's going to lose some of its power. So reviews and one-to-one references and webinars, we're already seeing webinars start to come down. All of these typical forms of content that we're used to generating with the support of our customers. I do think we're going to have to start thinking more and more savvily. How do we let customers tell their stories? And how do we get more and more out of it, probably as vendors? Because any sniff of the vendor relationship can bring some murkiness to that water. So I don't have any answers today on like what all the different types of content are going to be, but I do think you're right in the sense of that's going to have to go through some innovation as well. And that's great for customer advocacy professionals, because that's going to be a problem that we can help solve.
Well, thanks for answering the question that I didn't answer, Liz.
No, I think you answered part of it. I wasn't exactly sure what Sam was asking, but I think it's like a combination of what both of us answered.
Yeah, that is what Sam asked. No, that's not. That wasn't my answer.
I love both of those answers, and I mean, I'm a little biased, but I also feel like that's where video kind of you can't talk about authenticity in content without mentioning video, right? And I think to a lesser extent audio, but I totally agree. Like when I go on Amazon, it's the Amazon reviews are almost pointless, because what product on Amazon doesn't have like 4.5 star reviews? Like it's just so to me that. And I'm curious what both of you think about this. Is that where in the future, is that where we see and I'm sure it's not a cut and dried answer, but like, is that where we see more video? Because like you can get people's tone and you can kind of read their facial expressions, and you can just on video testimonials, video customer videos, or is it also that, and I'm sure it's both. It's like the new mediums and new formats of text, if we're going to keep doing text, have to kind of evolve as well.
Yeah, I think what's evolving with video in particular, Sam, is just the full scope of the types of video, reference material that we're seeing out there, from kind of the big production on site with a crew approach to a fully remote approach to almost more of kind of like a news feed kind of style approach. And each of those types of video I think play a very distinct role for different buyers, different markets at different points in their cycle. And each, to Liz's point, each instills or evokes a different level of trustworthiness when thought of together as a suite of video interactions. I think they're most powerful.
I do think it is novelty too, right? Like written word has been around for like the beginning of time. And video is still a pretty new medium, like, and it's still like the art of video is still evolving in my mind. A lot of people are still very uncomfortable with it. We all write to some extent, but I think we're going to see a huge shift as people have been on all these remote meetings. They are now getting used to seeing themselves on camera, as continually painful as it is. But there is going to be some level of familiarity with video that just did not exist 2 years ago. And so it will be interesting to see how the adoption rate of video and now, like, if we're to bring it back to advocacy, will you have more customers willing to participate in video opportunities, whether they are formal? It's still a great thing to have yourself in a formal, beautifully produced video. It's like seeing yourself in a movie to some extent. It's kind of like fulfilling some kind of fantasy, by the way, intrinsic motivator. But there's also this idea of, I'm just comfortable putting out ad hoc content now that I wouldn't have been willing to do before. And so how do we tap into this moment in time when video is becoming more acceptable? It's always been acceptable. It's always been quite stunning, but it's more acceptable. Like, I'm willing to put myself out there, knowing that, just like things on the internet, videos, they get passed around and they can live forever. So, but people just have a greater comfort level in it. And people are really receptive right now. I think right now is a good, really opportune time for video, because you're on that cusp, right? Where it's still something that catches your eye, that you stop for in a news feed, that you're willing to kind of click that button and invest. But we're not to the point of saturation where, oh my gosh, everyone is doing a video in every post, right? It'll be really interesting again to see how that goes and where video maturates to in the near future.
Such a good point. And before we close it out, what haven't I asked? Any other tips or perspective that either of you would like to share with the audience of marketers, marketing leaders who want to kind of do more when it comes to customer advocacy and customer storytelling?
I think for practitioners, now is the time. There has never been a better time to be a customer focused, customer obsessed marketer. And if this is your cup of tea, if you want to really build a career in this space, this is the time. And you're going to make moves by positioning yourself as a strategist, not a program manager, a strategist, aligned to the strategic priorities of the organization, talking the talk, understanding the C-suite, and moving your way through the organization. This is the time to do that.
That's a good one. And then one tip we often like to speak to is customer loyalty programs in B2C have been around for a long time. There's nothing really new about that. That's been around since the late 1800s. That is a practice that has evolved and iterated itself and has a really strong hold now, especially since the 80s and on. Shout out to Blockbuster for making it exciting to be part of a loyalty program. But, they are not the same practice by any means. It's very different relationships that happen between B2B and B2C. But there are so many great lessons to learn from B2C. And, as you watch B2C evolve in personalization and scale and relevance, those are things you can look at your experience as a B2C or as a consumer and say, why do I keep coming back to this loyalty program? Why do I use this app on a regular basis? Oh, because it's so freaking easy. It makes sense. It doesn't make sense not to. So, there are some lessons to be learned and brought over to the B2B side, which is a less mature practice right now. But use your own life. And then Dina will say this often is like, put yourself in the shoes of your customer, or as a consumer, as someone who is someone who interacts with vendors and brands all the time. What really makes sense? Why would you be a part of something like this? What would be of value to you? If you can, walk a mile in their shoes, you're bound to create a much more engaging program with longevity. Because right now, what we see is a lot of people are launching programs. A lot of people's programs are dying as well. And so you need to have the underlying strategy of why. Why would someone do this? Why would someone be here? And what are the barriers that we unthoughtfully put in place that keep people from continuing their advocacy journey with an organization?
I love that. And that, I think, is the perfect bow to kind of put on this and to tie it all together. So last but not least, Dina and Liz, where can people get in touch who want to, learn more about, you, connect with both of you, connect with, Captivate? What's the best way to do that?
I was going to say, I'm so happy to say you can now go to our newly revamped website, and because now I'm finally okay sending people to our website. So that would be www.thecaptivatecollective.com. But I think Dina was about to say LinkedIn is where we do a lot of our interaction. So following Captivate on LinkedIn is one of the best ways just to keep, like, we are trying so hard to keep new content coming all of the time, to really get practitioners in this space thinking hard, and really being the pioneers of that advocacy 2.0 that we see coming upon us. And so LinkedIn is definitely a great way to connect with us.
Amazing. Well, this has been a blast. I'm sure we'll have to do a episode 2 sometime. But thank you, Dina. Thank you, Liz. Appreciate you both jumping on here today.
Thanks for having us, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. Always a pleasure.
Alrighty, folks. That was a fantastic episode with Dina and Liz. Some of the things that we really hit on, the right, best practices, right strategy from the beginning, advocacy 1.0 versus 2.0, and the differences, how remote work has changed things, in particular, people's, familiarity and just willingness to kind of do more video, starting with talking to the customer. Like, if you're starting your program, go out there and talk to customers. What would the value that you would need to get out of that interaction be? And what's your no-brainer reason why someone would participate in your program? That two-way exchange of value. And then last but not least, like, that advocacy is a mindset. It's not a binary yes or no thing. It's a mindset, and you can start today. No matter where you are, you can, instill that mindset into the culture of your company. And as always, this is the State of Customer Storytelling podcast. I'm Sam Shepler from Testimonial Hero. And if you have anyone that you'd love to hear on the podcast, shoot me an email. My email is sam@testimonialhero.com. I'd love to hear from you. And until the next episode, have a fantastic time and good luck on all of your advocacy initiatives and programs.